Okay, for this particular segment, we're going to be talking about departing out of Charlotte. We've been given a clearance today to depart Charlotte on the Charlotte 2 departure, which according to what we see on this departure itself, it tells us off of runway 36 right, which is our departure runway today, that we need to make a climbing right turn to heading at 025 degrees. But I'm going to break that down a little bit more, and we're going to look at that in just a moment. But the first thing I want to bring out and point out to everybody is this, that when you're given the Charlotte 2 departure, going to the departures arrival page, you can notice here that we've got all these different departures. So we'll choose Charlotte 2. All right, but if you also notice, the transition is asking me for a transition. On your flight plan, it wants you to go to Merrill, M-E-R-I-L, Mike India Romeo India Lima, or Mike Echo Romeo India Lima, excuse me. And if you look at that, there is no Merrill on these transitions, so that means that, this is not going to be part of what we're going to be able to choose in this particular departure. So we have chosen Charlotte 2, which is exactly what we want, and I want to go off of runway 36 right. So I'll go ahead and choose 36 right, and there we go. I've got my departure set in, I've got my runway set in, we're ready to go. I can execute that. So again, coming off of this runway, according to my SID, it tells me I've got to go off and make a 025 heading after departure. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create some fixed rings so we can do some turns just to put some practice on this. So let's go back now to the fix page, okay? And we're going to use the Charlotte VOR. That's important. Don't use the Charlotte Airport for my turn. We're going to use the Charlotte VOR because even though they're very close in proximity, you could almost dare say they are co-located, but I'm not utilizing that for my DME distance. So we're going to type in CLT, which is the VOR, and enter that into line select key 1 left. And then, of course, now we get to break down in just a moment of the bearing distance indicator. So let's go ahead and make our first initial departure. We're going to fly it at runway heading, okay? So we'll get off of 36. We'll fly it as a runway heading, which I'm going to set that up right now so I don't forget. Basically, 005 heading essentially is runway heading coming off of 36 right there in Charlotte. So then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say, let's fly runway heading until we get to 3 DME. So I'll go ahead and put in /3. And I'll enter that into LSK 2L. If you can start to see the rings being built here, let me kind of zoom in for you so we can get a better look at these for my turning purposes. So when I get there to that first ring, if you will, I'm on a runway heading till I get to that point. And I'm going to start making a right turn. Let's make that right turn now at that next point to a heading of, let's make it 040. But when I get to that ring, I'm going to create yet another ring beyond it. Okay, let's make the next ring at 6 miles out. So /6, enter that, and now we've got yet another ring. So we're going to fly runway heading till we get to 3 DME, then a right turn at heading of 040 till we get to the 6 DME, and then from that point we're going to continue on to our first fix, which is going to be Merrill. Okay, so we'll go back to our legs page. Notice here also we have some discontinuities here. We want to clear this up. I'm just going to go ahead and take Merrill and move it to the very top line because that is going to be my very first place I'm going to be going after departure. Okay, how about speed? What's it tell us about speed here in this particular departure? Of course, we know 8,000 feet is the top altitude, which we've already put in. As far as the speed is concerned, I'm being shown here that we're to accelerate to 250 knots, and if unable to advise ATC. This will not be a problem here to get this aircraft to go to 250 knots whatsoever. So we already know in the VNAV page, if we look, the airplane's going to stay at 250 below 10,000 feet. We can confirm that there by looking at page 1 of 3 on the VNAV page, which is the climb page itself. Back to legs, it looks like we're about ready for departure, so let's go ahead and take off. And once we take off and we start making our way toward Merrill, we're going to start putting in some altitude restrictions. In fact, if we want to, if you're given one, you can actually do it before you even leave the ground, which is kind of neat. So if they give you that crossing restriction, let's take this out a little bit so have a look at Merrill. That's pretty far out there. If you'll notice, here's Merrill. We're showing Merrill about 77 miles away from where my current position is. Let's say I want to make a restriction before Merrill with a crossing restriction and a speed, okay? And then I want to create another altitude at Merrill and create yet another speed restriction beyond Merrill and an altitude, okay? So let's have a look at this and see what we can do. Merrill, let's go ahead and say air traffic control has cleared us to cross a point 30 miles prior to Merrill at an altitude of 15,000 feet. Okay? So that's just coming off the top of my head. So how do I create this waypoint. I have to select Merrill, okay? I'll bring it down to the scratch pad. I'll then hit the slash sign, okay, the forward slash, and then I'll hit the plus minus button and 30 miles for indicating the distance. And I will put that right on line select key 1 left because it knows that if it's prior, it's going to create a prior to Merrill, and it just put it right here for me. I'm going to go ahead and execute that, so now the airplane is going to be going to this first waypoint I've created. And we know it's going to be at a certain restriction altitude. What did we say that altitude was going to be? If we remember, it's 15,000 feet, right? So we're going to restrict that to an altitude of 15,000 feet. Unable next altitude I'm not going to worry about, but I'm also going to speed restrict it as well. So we're going to speed restrict me to 280 knots at that point and 15,000 feet. And that's how the entry goes, 280/150. We're going to put it up there in line select key 1 right. So I've just got done telling the airplane, listen, I want you to take off after I've given you these couple of turns where the fixed rings are. We're going to finally get on course going toward Merrill, in this case Merrill 01, where we have a restriction of 280 knots. 15,000 feet is in there. We know that to be good. We're looking at it in magenta. And we also have to execute this as well. Do not forget to do that. And also, let's see, what else do we want to do here? We have to make sure we're in VNAV and LNAV for departure. And I think that's where I want to be right now. I'm going to bring back the scale a little bit so I can see what I'm doing. And we'll make the other fixes as we start taking off and making our way toward Merrill. Right now, let's just concentrate on getting to that first fix. This may take a few moments to get airborne here, and once we do, then we can just make things happen as we need to. So I'm going to go ahead and get the aircraft on its way, accelerate and go. And I've got my toga pushed, brakes are off, and I've got ground speed alive, so let's get this airplane going and airborne. Remember now, it's going to be the runway heading till we get now to that first ring, all right, and then a right turn to a heading of 040, okay? And after that 040, then I will then give us a turn toward the first fix we've created, first waypoint we've created. Coming up on V1 and rotate right now. Let's get the airplane airborne. Got a positive rate of climb. We'll get our gear up. 2 clicks on the T5 button on the throttle control. Coming up on 400 feet, what do we got to do? It's going to be center command and the heading select because we want to fly that runway heading till we get to that first point, which is going to be here very, very rapidly. At the meantime, we've got to make sure we're keeping watch of flaps as well, so we're accelerating and bring the flaps up on schedule as required. Don't worry about the insufficient fuel, that's okay. Airplane is just now coming up on that very first ring. So my next turn is going to be to a heading of 040. We're going to make that right turn with the heading or the lubber line. You can see it moving to 040. Airplane's already in the heading select mode, so it's going to make that right turn for me. So we're in that right turn. How's my flaps doing here? We already are ready for retraction again here, next step up. So we've got our flaps coming up. We are accelerating. We're climbing to 8,000 feet. The VNAV is engaged, telling me that I will not exceed 250 knots. Airplane is now on a heading to get out to a point where we'll be making a further right turn to go to Merrill 01, which is going to be on course to where we need to go today. Again, we've restricted it to 280 knots and 15,000 feet. The VNAV and LNAV modes will know to capture that once we engage the aircraft into the full automation logic, which will be, LNAV is not right now working because I'm on heading select, but VNAV is certainly controlling my speeds. My flaps are now coming up. I'm at that heading. I'm going to go ahead and make this right turn now. And let's see where I'm going. Let's try to get toward that magenta line. I'm going to just take my scale out a bit longer. Where is my, oh, there's my first fix out there, MER 01. And I'm liking what I see here. So coming up on MER 01, I'm going to go ahead and engage my LNAV. Okay, it'll tell me not intercept heading, and that's okay. I'm going to clear that out. I'm going to double click on the first one, MER 01, double click and push execute, and now the airplane will go directly to Merrill 01, that first waypoint I created. We also want it to cross 15,000 feet, right? And 280 knots, so let's go ahead and get this thing up to 15,000 feet. All right, I'm going to have to hit the altitude intervention button here, perhaps, because I could have already caught or captured the 8,000 foot mark. And it looks like I have them at 250 knots. I'm leveling at 8,000 feet, but I do want to make that crossing restriction 40 miles away from me at 15. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the altitude intervention button and let the airplane now take the aircraft up to that altitude of 15,000 feet to make the restriction, and also 280 knots. Now, what do you think is going to happen when I get to 10,000 feet here? Where's that airspeed going to go to? If you answered 280 knots, you would be correct. We'll check that, we'll cross-confirm it once we get above 10,000 feet, because we've restricted it, as you notice here on the FMC, at MERO1, 280 and 15,000 feet. We can also look at the data block, and once we look at the data block, it'll tell me where I'm going to at the altitude of 15,000. 9,900, there's 10,000 feet, there's the pop, there she goes to 280 knots. We know it made it, so it's now on its way to 280 knots as we've wanted it to do exactly that. Okay, so all is looking good. Flaps are retracted, gear is up, airplane's accelerating, we're out of 10,000 feet. Ding ding on the overhead belt for the passengers to be allowed to use their portable electronic devices, and everything is good. All right, next restriction we're going to make is going to be actually at Merrill itself. The distance between Merrill 01 and Merrill is 30 miles. So what kind of restriction can we put in here? How about if we just put in a, let's put in a, can we just put a speed restriction in? Can we just put a speed restriction? How would you do that? How would you put a speed restriction in here for Merrill? Well, let's say we wanted to do 290. Let's go ahead and type in 290 and the slash, because that's how the format's set up. You have a slash in between, right? So 290 slash, I'm going to put it up here in line select 2R. Will it take it? That would be a big fat no. It will not take it. It does not allow you to make an entry of just an altitude, or correction, a speed. You have to put a speed in and an altitude for it to make that restriction. It has to have both. So how would I restrict the speed? How would I restrict that speed? That would be something I'd have to do until I get to Merrill and say, okay, next speed restriction is at 290 without any type of an altitude change. I can restrict it in the VNAV page. All right, I have to do that there. Is there any way I could do it? Otherwise, I have to put in the speed and the altitude restriction. So let's go ahead and put in Merrill. Let's cross Merrill now at, we're at 15,000 feet already. So let's go ahead and cross Merrill at flight level 230. And just 230, what is my entry going to be? Is going to be slash 230 LSK 2R. There's my altitude. It's in. I'll execute it. What else do I have to do? Obviously, I've got to roll up the MCP to the altitude. I'm going to just roll up to 35,000 feet because I know the airplane is going to stop at the altitude I've told it to do, which is 23,000. I'll roll up to 35. A lot of airlines like you to, dare I say, marry the altitude that's in the FMC with what's on the MCP, so there's no ambiguity. As is the same should be said about the lubber line. The lubber line should be married at all times with your course that you're currently flying. That should always be together. Airlines really want that to be the case because if you got to make a turn real quick, you can just reach up there and turn off, or turn the heading and hit heading select, the airplane will be an immediate turn. It's always a good thing. So 23,000 feet we got at Merrill. Did we give it a restriction other than the altitude? No, we did not. We're going to let that plane, let the aircraft climb. How are we going to get it to climb again? Boom, we're going to have to intervene by pushing the altitude intervention button for it to start to make that climb. What I want the airplane to do now is I want it to continue to climb without me intervening. I'm going to now create a new waypoint beyond Merrill, and I'm going to give it a speed and altitude restriction there. Okay, let's give it a speed and altitude restriction beyond Merrill. So let's make a new waypoint that's going to be 20 miles beyond Merrill. So I have to grab Merrill. Make sure you don't push MERO1. You have to use your anchor point from where you're building that waypoint, which in this case is Merrill. You already built one off of Merrill prior to, and I'm going to build one after. So we'll grab Merrill, bring it, it'll go down to the scratch pad, and then another /, and this time no plus or minus required, not required. Just type in 20 and then put it in LSK 2L. You're going to put it right on top of, as in physically select the button next to Merrill because it intuitively knows it's going to put it beyond it because I've told it through the input I've just given it. So now it's saying, okay, you want a new waypoint beyond Merrill? There it is, 20 miles. I see it right here also. I will execute that. I will execute that. So now it says, okay, Greg, you want to fly this particular routing? You want to make these restrictions? You want to be at 23,000 feet, right above, you want to be at 23,000 feet at Merrill. It's telling me, yes, sir, right there, I'm going to be at 23 grand. We want that. That's all right. But my next one I'm going to make, let's go and cross the next fix, the one we created beyond Merrill. Let's cross it at a speed of 310 knots. And let's cross it at flight level 280. So there's the entry 310/280, Merrill 02. We will then input it and execute it. We'll have a look and see, did it take it? Here it is indeed, it has taken it. So we know the airplane is going to do it. It's inputted. The data block tells me it's good. Again, don't forget, always keep an eye on that altitude tape. You can see here we have 2992, and you need it in yellow, so we have to change it over to a standard atmosphere in the United States is 18,000 feet, so the STD should be green, and that will again get you to standard atmosphere above 18 in this country. Other countries have lower ones, such as Japan, I believe, is 10,000, some places 14,000, some places lower. So you must check and make sure, whatever country you might be in, what is the transition altitude? And do they use hectopascals or do they use inches of mercury? These are things you have to keep certainly a situational awareness of. All right, we're coming up on our first fix we've created here, this new waypoint. We just created a little bit ago, and now we're making that left turn toward our next fix itself, Merrill. And then we've just told it, okay, 23,000 feet. We want to be there at 230 at Merrill, and guess what? We're already at 23,000 feet, so it's going to cross Merrill at 230. That's about 29 miles away from me right now, 28 miles. We're moving along pretty good. Got an 84 knot tailwind for me. The southwest, we're cruising along about 433 on the true airspeed. Ground speed's 507, so that's a pretty good clip. So we should be there in just a matter of moments, literally. And as a matter of fact, 57 there and 59 at the next one. So we are moving along pretty well. As you can see, the time stamp codes on there. Again, we're at 23. We're looking to go to cross Merrill 02 at flight level 280 and a speed of 310 knots. If I want to restrict my speed in VNAV, all right, if I want to restrict my speed in V navigation, I can do that. Right now I'm at 304, right? If I look at my VNAV page, I'm at my econ speed of 304. Let's say air traffic says to me, 701, for traffic, reduce your speed to 280 knots. Simply go in, type 280 on the VNAV page, enter it in the line select key 2 left, and you will see 280 pop up. Execute light will come on. Once you know that's the case, make sure you check also on the speed tape on the primary flight display. You execute it, and 280 will come over here, and then you'll see a speed reduction begin with the trend arrows showing downward to 280. Okay? Very simple to do that. We'll let the airplane reduce itself down to 280 knots. At that point in time, we're going to head, okay, resume normal speed in just a moment once we get it to slow down. To resume normal speed, it's a very simple keystroke as well to get you back to where you were going as fast as you were before in the economy mode. Remember, economy mode is already taking into account the cost index which we put in. That's that first one of the first entries you put in the performance initialization page when you are doing the initialization of the FMC. Putting in that number tells the airplane how to fly, how fast to fly. 0 to 9,999 in the 747, higher the number, the faster you go. It's a pretty simple equation. I could give you the actual equation itself, but for our purposes as a pilot, we really don't need to understand how that works, just we know that it does, because we're not worried about formulas at this point. Okay, so coming up on Merrill in just a moment, the big question is, will the airplane climb on its own to make the next restriction? That's the question. We will know that here in just a matter of about 6 miles. It's always one of those moments of trepidation. Will the airplane do it or won't it do it? And you as a pilot have to be ready to intervene. That's where the old click, 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 click comes into play. Because again, as according to that movie you probably saw at the beginning of the semester, Children of the Magenta, the question you will ask millions of times in your career is, what's it doing now? Because you're not sure what it's doing now. So you keep it on it, good situational awareness. Again, we're about 2 miles away from knowing, is the airplane going to climb? What's it going to do? What is it going to do? And we'll know again shortly, because the next fix we have, we've given it a restriction. There's the turn. I can see it already starting to make the turn trend. Coming up over top of that fix itself at Merrill. And okay, are we going to continue to climb or go 280 knots? Or are we going to go to 310? Well, we know one thing's for sure. We're climbing. There it is. We are climbing. So we know the airplane's going to make its next climb up to make the next restriction. But if you notice, we're still at the 280 knots we've restricted it at when we did the restriction moments ago. How do I get out of that restriction? Very simply, go back into my VNAV page, and we'll now go to the Econ. It says Econ LSK 5 left. By pushing that button, we should return back to our 304. It says, yes, that's what you want. I'll hit execute. 304 pops up on the primary flight display on the airspeed tape, and man, we're off to the races. Let's look at the legs page. I've told it 310 knots and 280. What's it going to do? That's a good question. Will it do 310 knots? Or will it do the Econ speed of 304? These are questions we may or may not know. In just a minute, we'll find out. Are we going to make the 28,000 foot restriction? We're climbing through 25,200 right now. We've got about 10 miles to go before we get to 280. We should be within the limitation of the aircraft to make the climb according to performance. Again, will the airplane go to 310? Even I wonder that sometimes because I have given it a restriction. But we'll find out. It's all part of discovery. Should it go? Perhaps. It's been told by the FMC, and it's in LNAV and VNAV, that it should do 310, and it should be at 28,000 feet at that point. We're 6 miles away. We're about 1,500 feet away, actually about 1,000 feet away now from being at the altitude for the restriction for the cross. And let's see what happens here. What's going to happen in just a moment. Are we going to make the restriction? I'd say the answer is most definitely yes, to make the 280 restriction at MER02. And the speed is 304 according to the Econ page, which is good. What's it going to do when it gets to MER 02? Is it going to continue to climb at that point? What's it going to do? Is it going to continue to climb to 350? Because that's what's up in the MCP, right? Yeah, let's see what it does. I'm on top of that fix right now. Ho-ho! Look what it did. We arrived right at that fix at 28,000 feet. It said, okay, I've made that restriction. I'm heading my way up to 35,000 feet, and that's exactly what it's doing. Notice the 310 is gone. We hit that fix exactly at 28,000 feet, and the 310 didn't apply because it said, okay, I've given you the altitude. That speed restriction no longer is applying to me. I'll go back to Econ speed, which is exactly what it did. 304 is where it held. So it never accelerated, just because of the way it was programmed. Just because of the way it's programmed. We'll have to look for another time to see if we can actually see if it will accelerate. In fact, that might be a good assignment for you to try it on your own time and practice.